Which brings me in the position without further ado to give the floor to Professor Platon Tinios from Piraeus University. You would need the not working tool anyhow, so I give it to you, who has also been involved in consultancy and will share his analysis right now.
Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Και όσο περιμένω την παρουσίαση να εμφανιστεί, το ασφαλιστικό είναι πιο παλιό από το κυπριακό και έχει επιληθεί εξίσου αποτελεσματικά και είπα να το διεθνοποιήσω, να μιλήσω στα αγγλικά, αφού μπας και πιάσει. Γιατί τα ακούσατε από τον πάνω, τώρα θα ακούσετε και εμένα αγγλικά. Λοιπόν, είναι και οι κλασικές αναφορές. Αυτή είναι πιο φιλολογική αναφορά, είναι για τραγωδία σε 3 διαγράμματα. Λοιπόν, το επόμενο. Λοιπόν. Tragedy in 3 diagrams. So, we are very good at being terrible. The Greek pension system was never sustainable. It increases poverty. It gives no security in old age. And even so, it managed to bankrupt the country and undermine 2 adjustment programs, and it's currently undermining the 3rd. Nevertheless, there has been a solution since 1958. A very detailed solution, which is described in the slide. Incidentally, it was composed by Yanos Papandoniou's mother, and describes very much what Yoros Katrougalos said. Common rules for everyone. Now, this reform was ready in 1958, but it was postponed because they had elections in which Ada did very well in 1958. It was postponed again in 1968, 1978, 1988, 2008, and now George is saying that we'll give you our final verdict on this reform in 2018. So that's pretty good going. So something must be really very wrong with reform technology about this. And what I'll do, I'll try to elucidate it very quickly in 3 steps. First is how to miss the point completely, how to kick down the can down the road, and how to avoid a fresh start. Right. So there's been 3 phases of pension issues under discussion over the last 60 years. First was the initial stage, how to set up the pension system, how to cover the whole population with common rules. The second one, that was the initial stage of social insurance in the 1950s and 60s. The second one was to do with aging, and that most countries dealt with this in the last decade or so of the 20th century. And now the social insurance systems are meeting what we had talked a little bit yesterday. So it's the challenges of globalization, new technology, how can you insure and how you can get revenue out of an economy which has a lot of Ubers. That is what currently is being grappled about. Now, we got stuck on the first question, and we didn't realize that the world is changing, and as a result, we are producing a solution to a very old problem, and ignoring the fact that what the current situation needs is something completely different. And this shows the spread of private systems in Europe. At the moment, there's only Spain, Greece, and France which resolutely persist in not having private systems. And Greek society, as we talk here, is blissfully unaware that the question set has changed. So it is still trying to answer question set 1, while everybody else is trying to answer question set 3. So the question is, how can we do this? And this is the second diagram, the can down the same road. Now people think that we were very bad at pension reform up in 2010, but then we called in the Troika and they delivered a set of pension reforms. And what has changed, what was used to happen before 2010, there was a lot of talk and no action. From 2010, there's a lot of action and no talk. And Yoros Katrougalos, to his credit, is the first minister who has actually tried to address the issue. I disagree with him, but I do like the fact that he speaks and we can argue. Now, the kind of mechanism that led to kicking the can down the road before are now slightly different, but the result is exactly the same. Firstly is misinformation. So, for example, stopping the flow of data, and that leads to the inability of building alliances. There's avoidance of discussion, which ultimately leads to the ignorance that the world outside has changed. And there's blame avoidance, very massive blame avoidance. For the insurance problem at the moment, it's not the insurance system which is at blame, it's the troika or the crisis. Now that actually means that you ultimately end up having ignorance of the internal constraints and of the internal changing conditions. And finally there's what Panos touched on, that's misrepresentation, there is misperceptions, misstatements and misunderstandings. For instance, while the poverty of the poor is being reduced very rapidly, we still talk as though that is the main problem. For instance, the repeated position that we can't cut pensions because grandmothers give pensions to their unemployed grandchildren. I mean, that begs the question, who finances grandmothers' pensions? And secondly, why not give the money to the grandchildren directly? Why give it to the grandmother to pass it down? So all these things together end up with a new set of passing the can down the same road, and you end up having the wrong solutions to the wrong problems. So, and George Katrougalos will be very surprised to see that, but what he needs to study very quickly is the Leninist theory of class consciousness and revolution. Now, economics and sociology, bourgeois sociology is very good at explaining how things are, functionalist. Now, that cannot explain why things need to change and how does change come about. And actually, it's the third time that the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte is being referred to in this conference. There was twice this morning and once yesterday. And that's the theory of class consciousness, where you start with the idea, you have the working class, the objective class consciousness, the working class in itself, then the working class for itself, but that is not enough. You need to have a political representation of the working class, which starts in the social democratic way. I see him nodding, and then he proceeds to the vanguard of the Leninist vanguard of the working class, who actually take and they produce the social change. Now, you can actually apply this mode of thinking to any kind of radical change. So you need the formulation of the problem. You need the wider realization of the problem in society, that is not just an issue for think tanks, but it affects them personally. Then you need solutions within the system. And finally, you need to take the final step, which to convince people that what the system they actually have is hopeless, and they need to take a very radical step and move out of the system. In the case of pensions, we can start off with having technocratic statements and studies. These need to be discussed in society. There needs to be parametric reforms. And finally, we have something which looks like a new system. Now, in Greece, we have managed to, every one of these stages, in the case of pension reforms, we have managed to block them. Every time somebody comes along with some ideas, they're usually maligned or ignored. There's bullying of dissenters in the media, very common. A lot of people in this room have had personal experience of this. There's reform by installments, which is too little, too late. And finally, what you end up is that you have the downward spiral which continues. So what the bottom line is that in Greece we are unable to prepare, plan, and implement reforms, and hence the failure of reforms is certain even before they start, unfortunately. So, recapitulating.
Please, last minute as well.
6 points. First, the Greek pension system was never able to correct its original sin, which was fragmentation and the application of general rules. As a consequence, it missed the fact that the world had changed, and with it, the characteristics of the pension system appropriate in the 21st century. Even after 2010, the Troika only began putting in place what was essentially a revamped 1960s pay-as-you-go statist system, like the ones that everybody had been abandoning. Fourthly, the mechanisms of postponement continued to operate after 2010 in a slightly changed form, built around blame avoidance this time. The need for a fresh start is repeatedly missed, and the system sinks in a spiral of ever deeper mistrust. And finally, the reform technology available is unable to deliver even minor parametric reforms. Now, a French politician once is said to have remarked that he had never encountered a problem whose non-solution was not in itself a solution. Now, in the case, this is what Greek governments have tried to do in the case of pensions and just about everything else for the last 30 years. They've just been avoiding the problem and hoping that a non-solution will actually prove a pretty good solution for them. And I think in the case of pensions, we've actually proved that that is completely wrong. Thank you very much.